The first-class cabin of Skyline Airways Flight 372 from Hong Kong to San Francisco gleamed with polished wood and leather. Crystal glasses gleamed softly as flight attendants moved through the spacious cabin, offering pre-departure champagne to passengers settling into their wide seats. The gentle hum of conversation filled the air, executives discussing quarterly reports, couples planning luxury vacations, all the familiar sounds of privilege. At 35,000 feet, Raphael Mendoza sat quietly by the window, his weathered hands folded neatly in his lap. At 58, his salt and pepper hair framed a face marked by decades of perseverance. His eyes, deep and contemplative, gazed out at the busy tarmac workers preparing the aircraft. He wore comfortable jeans, worn soft from many washes, and a simple navy blue sweater that had seen better days, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer wear surrounding him. "Sir, would you like some champagne before takeoff?" asked a flight attendant named Cynthia, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to tighten her already practiced smile. "Just water, please," Raphael replied softly, his Filipino accent gentle but distinct. Something flickered across Cynthia's face, momentary shift in her expression so subtle that most would miss it. But Raphael had spent decades reading rooms where he was the only person who looked like him. He recognized the look instantly. Doubt, assessment, judgment. "Of course," she replied with a slight purse of her lips, the professional veneer firmly back in place as she moved on to the next passenger, her voice notably warmer. Eleanor Whitman, settling into the seat beside Raphael, didn't miss the exchange. At 72, the retired English teacher had developed a keen eye for the subtle dynamics of human interaction. She smoothed her floral dress over her knees and gave Raphael a warm smile. "I'm Eleanor," she said, extending a hand adorned with a modest wedding band that had clearly never left a finger in decades. "First time flying Skyline." "Raphael," he answered, shaking her hand. "And no, not my first time with them, though it's been many years." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "I'm visiting my grandson in San Francisco. He just had his first baby. I'm going to be a great-grandmother." Her eyes twinkled with delight. "What takes you to San Francisco, if you don't mind my asking?" Raphael's lips curved into a small smile. "Business. I've just concluded some negotiations in Hong Kong." Before Eleanor could respond, the aircraft's captain made his welcome announcement, his voice smooth and assured. Raphael closed his eyes briefly, remembering another flight. Another time, his mother's soft voice telling him stories as they sat in their small home in the Philippines. The scent of jasmine and cooking rice filling the air. "Be like bamboo, anak," she would say. "Bend, but never break." As the plane taxied toward the runway, Raphael opened the leather folder he'd kept on his lap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, confirmation of his company's acquisition of a 51% stake in Skyline Airways, finalized that morning. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, Maya. "All paperwork filed. You're officially the majority owner. Congratulations, sir." Raphael allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before powering off his phone. The journey that had started in a small village in Batangas had led him here to the helm of yet another international company. His mother would have been proud, though she would have reminded him that power was meaningless without purpose. The flight took off smoothly, the cityscape of Hong Kong receding beneath them. Once they reached cruising altitude, the cabin crew began their meal service preparations. Raphael observed the methodical efficiency of their movements, the practiced smiles, the careful attention paid to certain passengers, particularly the loud American businessman 3 rows ahead, who had already consumed 3 glasses of champagne, and was making increasingly inappropriate comments to the younger female flight attendants. "Sir, would you prefer the chicken or beef for your main course?" Cynthia asked the businessman, her tone indulgent as she leaned slightly closer than necessary. "I'll take the beef rare like my women," the man replied with a wink that made Raphael's jaw tighten. Several passengers chuckled while others looked uncomfortably away. When Cynthia finally approached Raphael's row, her demeanor had noticeably shifted. "And for you?" she asked, the question directed at Eleanor. "I'll try the chicken, please." Eleanor answered, her eyes narrowing slightly at the flight attendant's tone. "And for you, sir?" Cynthia finally addressed Raphael, her voice dropping to a barely professional level. "The beef, please," Raphael replied evenly. Cynthia made a small notation and moved on without acknowledgement. Eleanor frowned but said nothing, instead engaging Raphael in conversation about his business, carefully avoiding personal questions when she sensed his natural reserve. Raphael found himself enjoying the elderly woman's company. She reminded him of his favorite teacher from childhood who had first encouraged his talent for mathematics, the skill that had eventually led to his success in technology and business. An hour later, meal service began. The fragrant aroma of gourmet cuisine filled the cabin. Passengers were served fine china plates bearing succulent enter accompanied by fresh bread and fine wine. The American businessman loudly proclaimed his meal acceptable as he demanded another glass of scotch. When Cynthia reached their row, she served Eleanor with professional courtesy. Then she placed a tray before Raphael that contained a dry piece of plain bread and a small plastic cup of water. No entree, no silverware. This suits you better, she whispered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. A few muffled laughs came from the row behind them. The cabin fell into a strange silence. Raphael stared at the plate, his face betraying no emotion, though his heart raced with a familiar pain, the sting of discrimination he had faced many times before. Excuse me, Eleanor said, her voice sharp with indignation. There must be some mistake. My seatmate ordered the beef. Cynthia's smile remained fixed. This is what's available for him. Raphael gently touched Eleanor's arm. It's all right, he said quietly. With deliberate calm, he took out his phone and photographed the plate. Then he typed a brief message to Maya. Document everything. Prepare the legal team for tomorrow. Eleanina's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. I'm calling for the supervisor. Please don't, Raphael said, his voice carrying the quiet dignity that had guided him through decades of navigating spaces where he was unwelcome. Some lessons need to be learned the proper way. As he sat with his bread and water, Raphael remembered. To his mother's words once more. Be like bamboo. There was strength in flexibility in choosing when and how to respond. Today would not be a day of confrontation, but of careful documentation. Tomorrow would be something else entirely. Eleanor watched him with growing respect and curiosity. Who was this man who faced humiliation with such composure? What strength lay beneath his quiet exterior? What neither of them knew was that the cabin cruise day was about to take a dramatic turn. The real story would begin when the plane touched down in San Francisco, when Raphael Mendoza would finally reveal exactly who he was and what he intended to do with his newly acquired airline. The stale bread crumbled between Raphael's fingers as he methodically broke it into small pieces. He didn't eat it. Instead, he arranged the crumbs on the pristine white napkin, forming a pattern that reminded him of the rice fields in his hometown of Batangas. Each deliberate movement helped calm his racing thoughts, and the familiar ache in his chest, the same ache he had felt 30 years ago when his mother had been denied boarding on a flight to his university graduation. You're not going to eat that, are you? Eleanor whispered, her eyes darting between Raphael and the crumbs. Raphael shook his head. No, but I want to keep it. Eleanor leaned closer. I can share my meal with you, she offered, already cutting her chicken into neat portions. Thank you, but no, Raphael replied gently. It's important I keep things exactly as they were served. As the flight continued over the vast Pacific Ocean, Raphael's mind drifted back to his childhood home, a modest two-room house with a tin roof that sang during monsoon rains. His mother, Lucia, had run a small textile business from their front room, her weathered hands working the traditional loom late into the night. The rhythmic click-clack of the wooden frame had been his childhood lullaby. Raphael, his mother would say, her voice soft but firm as she worked. Remember that bamboo grows in silence. People only notice when it's tall enough to shade them. Growing up in a small village where electricity was unreliable and clean water a luxury, Raphael had learned early to find strength in silence. His father had died when he was just 7, leaving Lucia to raise 5 children alone. She had managed through sheer determination, selling enough textiles to feed her family and eventually send Raphael to university in Manila. Are you in technology? Eleanor asked, pulling Raphael from his memories. My grandson works for a tech company in Silicon Valley. All those computers and whatnot. It's like magic to me. Raphael smiled. Yes, I founded a software company. Oh. Eleanor's eyes brightened. What's it called? Maybe I've heard of it. Mendoza Tech, he replied simply. Eleanor gasped softly. The Mendoza Tech? Why? My grandson talks about your company all the time. You're that Raphael Mendoza, the one who revolutionized banking security systems. Raphael nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. That's our main business line. Yes. Well, I never, Eleanor exclaimed, then lowered her voice. And they serve you bread and water. Do they know who you are? They see what they choose to see, Raphael replied. A Filipino man in casual clothes, nothing more. As they spoke, Raphael noticed Cynthia at the front of the cabin checking something on her phone. Her expression suddenly changed, her face paling as she stared at the screen. She quickly whispered something to another flight attendant, who glanced back at Raphael with wide eyes. I believe they're beginning to understand, Raphael said quietly. Elelonina followed his gaze. What's happening? Information travels quickly these days, Raphael replied. Even at 35,000 feet, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into San Francisco. Raphael gazed out the window at the scattered clouds below, thinking about his mother's last visit to the Philippines before she passed away 5 years ago. They had sat on the porch of his beachfront home, a far cry from their humble beginnings, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. You've done well, Anak, she had said, her once strong hands now gnarled with arthritis. But remember why you climb mountains, to help others climb with me. He had finished for her, the familiar saying, worn smooth like a riverstone from years of repetition. Lucia had nodded, satisfied. Never forget where you came from. The bamboo that grows too tall without strong roots will fall in the first storm. Raphael had built his company on those principles, creating educational programs in rural Philippines, hiring local talent, establishing scholarships for underprivileged students. His business acumen had made him wealthy, but his mother's wisdom had made him purposeful. As the plane began its descent, Cynthia approached their row, her confident demeanor now replaced with visible anxiety. She clutched a cloth napkin that revealed a slice of chocolate cake when she unfolded it. Mr. Mendoza, she said, her voice trembling slightly. There was a terrible mistake with your meal. Please accept our sincere apologies and this dessert as a small token. No, thank you, Raphael said firmly, but without malice. I prefer to keep the record of what was originally offered to me. Cynthia's face flushed. Sir, I assure you, this was not our standard service. It was your service to me, Raphael interrupted, his voice quiet but unyielding. And I'd like to keep it documented exactly as it was presented. Elelonina watched the exchange with fascination. Though Raphael's words were polite, there was still beneath them the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Cynthia retreated, her hand shaking slightly. Other crew members were now stealing glances at Raphael, their expressions a mixture of confusion and apprehension. What will you do? Elelona asked once they were alone again. Raphael turned to her, his expression softening. What would you do, Elelonina? If you had the power to change this situation, how would you use it? Elelonina considered the question carefully. I'd want them to learn something, not just to be punished, but to actually understand what they did. Wrong. Raphael nodded, pleased with her answer. Exactly. Punishment without. Education is just revenge. I'm not interested in revenge. The plane descended through the clouds, revealing the magnificent San Francisco Bay below. Raphael thought about his plans for Skyline Airways, plans he had conceived long before today's incident. The discrimination he had experienced was not unique. It was simply more visible because of his position. How many others had suffered similar treatment without the power to address it? As they touched down on the runway, Raphael's phone buzzed with another message from Maya. Security team in place as requested. Skyline CEO is waiting in the airport conference room. Will I see you again? Eleanor asked as they prepared to disembark. I'd love to hear how this turns out. Raphael smiled, reaching into his pocket for a business card. I have a feeling our paths will cross again, Eleanor. Sometimes the universe puts the right people in the right places at exactly the right time. Elelona took the card, her eyes widening at the embossed gold lettering that confirmed exactly who Raphael was. It was their mistake, she said, judging you by your appearance. A common mistake, Raphael replied. But today it will be a costly one. As the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began to rise. Raphael remained seated, watching as the crew gathered at the front of the cabin, their worried whispers carrying the nervous energy of people who sensed something significant was about to happen. What awaited them at the gate would change not just their day, but the entire culture of an airline. Raphael took a deep breath, centering himself for what was to come. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Be like bamboo, my son. Bend, but never break. The time for bending was over. Now was the time to stand tall. The passengers filed out of the aircraft in a slow procession. Raphael remained in his seat, his posture relaxed but alert like a chess player who had anticipated his opponent's every move. Elena hesitated beside him. Aren't you coming? She asked, gathering her floral handbag. In a moment, Raphael replied. Would you do me a favor, Elena? Wait for me at the gate. I believe you'll want to see what happens next. Eleanor's eyes twinkled with curiosity. Wouldn't miss it for the world, she said, joining the queue in the aisle. As the cabin emptied, Raphael observed the crew huddled near the galley, their faces etched with worry. Cynthia's phone was passed between them as they whispered urgently. Captain Whitaker, a tall man with silver hair and an authoritative bearing, emerged from the cockpit and approached Raphael. Mr. Mendoza, he said, extending his hand with a forced smile. I understand there was an issue with your meal service. I want to personally assure you, let's not discuss it here, Raphael interrupted, his voice calm but resolute. He finally stood, his modest height belying the gravity of his presence. I believe there's a meeting arranged at the gate. The captain's smile faltered. Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this without I prefer to address it formally, Raphael said, his tone brooking no argument. With all relevant parties present, the walk through the jet bridge seemed interminable to the crew members trailing behind Raphael. They emerged into the terminal where a striking woman in a precisely tailored suit stood, waiting, flanked by airport security officers. Mr. Mendoza, she greeted. Him with a respectful nod. The conference room is prepared according to your instructions. Thank you, Maya, Raphael replied. Elena was waiting nearby, her eyes wide as she took in the security team. Raphael gestured for her to join them. I'd like Miss Whitman to accompany us as a witness, he explained to Ma. She was seated beside me during the incident. The procession moved through the terminal, Raphael and Elena in front, followed by Mia and the security team, with the increasingly anxious crew bringing up the rear. Travelers turned to stare at the unusual sight. They arrived at a conference room where a balding man in his 60s stood nervously by the windows. Richard Townsend, CEO of Skyline Airways, wiped perspiration from his forehead with a monogram handkerchief. Raphael, he said, his voice strained with forced joviality. This is an unexpected pleasure. Is it? Raphael asked mildly, taking a seat at the head of the table. I would have thought my presence on your airline would be noted, especially after this morning's acquisition. Richard's face palled. There appears to have been a communication breakdown. I only learned of your presence on board when your assistant called during the flight. A communication breakdown? Raphael repeated the words hanging in the air like a judge's gavel. An interesting way to describe it, Maya distributed folders to everyone present. These contain the incident documentation, she explained, as well as supporting evidence of similar incidents reported by other passengers over the past 3 years. Raphael observed the room. The flight attendants sat rigidly, their expressions ranging from defiance, Cynthia, to fear, a younger attendant named Brian, according to his name tag. Captain Whitaker maintained a stony facade, while Richard Townsend looked increasingly ill. Elena opened her folder and gasped softly at the contents. Dozens of complaints from passengers of color, most marked resolved, with no further action. I purchased a controlling interest in Skyline Airways for 2 reasons, Raphael began, his voice measured and calm. First, because despite your recent financial troubles, your routes align perfectly with my company's expansion needs. Second, because of this, he placed a photograph on the table. It showed an elderly Filipino woman in simple but neat clothing standing outside an airport, tears streaming down her face. This is my mother, Lucia Mendoza, 30 years ago. She had saved for months to fly to San Francisco for my university graduation. Her visa was legitimate, her paperwork in order, but your ground staff decided she looked suspicious. They denied her boarding, claiming her documents might be falsified. She missed my graduation, and she never attempted to fly again on any airline for the rest of her life. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Cynthia's defiant expression wavered. Today, Raphael continued, I was served bread and water in your first-class cabin, while other passengers enjoyed a full meal. When I asked why, I was told it suited me better. He turned to Cynthia, who now stared fixedly at the table. Would you care to explain what you meant by that statement? Cynthia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. I'm not here for individual apologies, Raphael said, his gaze sweeping the room. I'm here because this incident reflects a culture that will change starting today. Richard Townsend leaned forward desperately. Raphael, I assure you, this is not what Skyline stands for. We can arrange a settlement. I'm not interested in compensation. Raphael cut him off sharply. I'm interested in transformation. He opened his own folder and laid out a detailed plan for company-wide anti-discrimination training, revised hiring practices, and a new passenger complaint system with accountability measures. This is what will happen, he stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. As majority shareholder, I'm implementing these changes effective immediately. Captain Whitaker finally spoke, his voice tight with suppressed anger. You're leveraging one incident into a complete takeover of our operational procedures. One incident, Elelanina interjected, surprising everyone. I've been through not even half this folder, and I can tell you it's far more than one incident. It's a pattern, Captain. Raphael nodded appreciatively at Eleanor before addressing the room again. Some of you will be part of this transformation, others will not. His gaze rested on Cynthia, who had finally found her voice. You can't just fire us for one mistake. You're right, Raphael agreed, surprising her. Which is why I asked Mia to compile these files. Your mistake today is documented alongside 6 similar complaints against you personally in the past 18 months. The same applies to you, Captain Whitaker, and to flight attendants Miller and Thompson. The younger flight attendant, Brian, looked up in alarm. And me, sir. Raphael's expression softened slightly. You, Mr. Chen, have no complaints in your file. In fact, another passenger informed me that you attempted to bring me a proper meal discreetly, but was stopped by your colleagues. Is this correct? Brian nodded, relief washing over his face. Then you have a choice to make, Raphael said, about whether you want to be part of the new Skyline Airways. Richard Townsend had recovered some composure. What exactly are you proposing? Raphael. A complete restructuring, Raphael replied, beginning with the immediate termination of employment for the crew members with documented patterns of discriminatory behavior. For the rest, mandatory participation in our new training program. He turned to Maya, who distributed a second set of folders. These contain separation agreements for those who will be leaving today, including generous severance packages contingent upon non-disclosure agreements. Cynthia stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. This is ridiculous. You can't do this. I can and I am. Raphael replied calmly. You have 20 minutes to review the agreements. Those who choose not to sign will still be terminated, but without the benefits outlined. As the reality of the situation sank in, the atmosphere in the room shifted from disbelief to resignation. Captain Whitaker stared at Raphael with cold hatred. Cynthia's defiance crumbled into tears. The other 2 flight attendants quietly reviewed their agreements. Richard Townsend looked shell-shocked. And my position, he asked quietly. We'll discuss your future with the company privately, Raphael answered. After you've had time to review the complete transformation plan as the crew members made their decisions, most signing the agreements with trembling hands, Elelanina watched Raphael with newfound respect. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability delivered with both firmness and mercy. When the last signature was collected and the dismissed employees were escorted out, only Raphael, Elelanina, Maya, Richard, and Brian remained in the conference room. This is just the beginning, Raphael said, his voice gentler now. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding Skyline Airways into something my mother would have been proud to fly on. He turned to Brian. If you're interested, I'd like you to lead our new passenger advocacy division. Your first task would be helping to design our anti-discrimination training program. Brian straightened in his chair. I'd be honored, sir. Elelanina watched as Raphael methodically laid out his vision for the airline's future. She couldn't help wondering what other plans he had in store and what role she might play in them. The morning sun filtered through the mist surrounding San Francisco Bay, casting golden light across the water. Raphael stood at the window of his hotel suite, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city come to life. In his reflection, he could see traces of his mother's features, the same determined set to the jaw, the same thoughtful eyes. His phone buzzed with a message from Maya. The press is asking for comments about the Skyline restructuring. How do you want to proceed? Raphael typed a brief response. No comments yet. Let's focus on implementation first. His night had been restless, filled with memories of his mother, her calloused hands weaving intricate patterns on her loom, her soft voice singing traditional Filipino lullabibas, her fierce determination to give her children opportunities she never had. In his dreams, she had asked him a single question. What will you build from this moment, Anak? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Maya entered, impeccably dressed as always, carrying a tablet and a stack of folders. Good morning, sir, she said. We have a full day ahead. The Skyline board is assembled in the conference room downstairs. They're quite anxious. Raphael nodded. And our other guests? Mr. Chen arrived 15 minutes ago. Miss Whitman is in the lobby. The legal team is ready with all documents. Excellent. Raphael turned from the window. Let's not keep them waiting. The hotel's conference room hummed with tension. 8 men and 2 women in expensive suits sat around the polished table, their expressions guarded as Raphael entered. Richard Townsend, looking as if he hadn't slept, stood to make introductions. I believe we can dispense with formalities, Raphael said, taking his place at the head of the table. You all know who I am, and I've reviewed your profiles extensively. He nodded to Ma, who distributed comprehensive folders to each board member. What you're receiving is not a proposal, but a plan. As majority shareholder, I've already set these changes in motion. Victoria Harrington, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, spoke first. Mr. Mendoza, while we appreciate your investment in Skyline, these changes are extremely disruptive. Terminating senior staff without board consultation was necessary and within my rights. Raphael finished for her. Page 3 details the documented patterns of discriminatory behavior that led to yesterday's terminations. Page 4 outlines the legal liabilities the company has incurred by ignoring these issues. The board members flipped to the indicated pages, their expressions growing more somber. This isn't just about yesterday's incident, Raphael continued. Though that was certainly the final straw. This is about a systemic failure that's been ongoing for years. He pressed a button and the room screens displayed a graph showing passenger complaints categorized by passenger ethnicity and nationality. The data speaks for itself, he said quietly. Passengers of color, particularly those from Southeast Asian countries, file 3 times more service complaints than white passengers. Yet their complaints are 5 times less likely to receive meaningful resolution. The board shifted uncomfortably. James Wilson, the eldest member, cleared his throat. These statistics are concerning certainly, but isolated incidents are not isolated when they form a pattern. Eleanina interjected from her seat near the door. All heads turned toward her. Raphael smiled. Allow me to introduce Eleanor Whitman, who witnessed yesterday's incident and has graciously agreed to serve as a consultant for our new passenger advocacy division. Eleanor nodded to the startled board. At 72, I've seen a lot of changes in this world, some for the better, some not. What I witnessed yesterday was unacceptable in any era, but what Mr. Mendoza is proposing, that's the kind of change worth making. Raphael gestured to Brian Chen, who sat beside Eleanina. And this is Brian Chen, formerly a flight attendant with Skyline, now the head of our new division. Mr. Chen, would you share your perspective? Brian stood, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice steady. For 3 years, I've watched incidents like yesterday's occur regularly. I've filed internal reports. I've tried to intervene, but the culture made it clear that speaking up too loudly would cost me my job. He described numerous incidents. Asian passengers being accidentally downgraded, while white standby passengers took their first-class seats. Middle Eastern travelers subjected to random additional security checks that weren't random at all. Elderly non-English speakers left without assistance, while younger white travelers received personal escorts between gates. As Brian spoke, the board's resistance visibly weakened. By the time he finished, Victoria Harrington was taking detailed notes, and even James Wilson looked troubled. What exactly are you proposing? Wilson asked Raphael. Raphael laid out his plan. A complete overhaul of training programs, hiring practices, and complaint procedures, the creation of the Passenger Advocacy Division, and monthly diversity audits with results reported directly to the board. Additionally, he continued, we'll be establishing the Lucia Mendoza Scholarship for underprivileged students pursuing careers in aviation. 5 recipients each year will receive full educational funding and guaranteed internships with Skyline. The board discussion that followed was intense but constructive. By lunchtime, even the most resistant members had conceded that change was necessary. The vote to adopt Raphael's plan was unanimous, though, as Mia quietly reminded them, it would have proceeded regardless of their vote. As the board members filed out for a lunch break, Richard Townsend lingered behind. "I've been CEO of Skyline for 14 years, he said quietly. "I convinced myself we were doing well enough, that these incidents were inevitable exceptions in a global business." Raphael studied the older man's face, noting the genuine remorse in his eyes. "What happens to me now?" Richard asked. "I assume you're bringing in your own CEO." "Actually," Raphael replied, "I'm not. You're remaining as CEO, Richard, with conditions." Richard looked up in surprise. "You built this airline from a regional carrier into an international business," Raphael explained. "That required vision and leadership. I believe those qualities can be redirected toward building a more inclusive culture." He outlined his expectations. Richard would work closely with Brian and Elena personally, overseeing the implementation of the new policies. His compensation would be partially tied to diversity metrics, and he would make a public statement, acknowledging the company's past failures and commitment to change. "Can you do this, Richard?" Raphael asked. "Not just go through the motions, but truly lead this transformation." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "My father would have handled this situation exactly as I did, ignoring the problems, protecting the status quo." He looked up at Raphael. "I've spent my career trying to make him proud. Perhaps it's time I tried to make myself proud instead." Raphael nodded, satisfied. "We begin tomorrow." Later that afternoon, Raphael took Elena to lunch at a small Filipino restaurant in the city as they savored traditional dishes. "Easier perhaps, but not better," Raphael replied. "True transformation requires both accountability and opportunity. Remove either and you're left with either punishment without growth or promises without substance." Eleanor considered this as she sampled the purple yam dessert called ube. "Will you tell me more about your mother?" The woman in that photograph looked remarkable. Raphael's eyes softened. "She was the strongest person I've ever known. Raised 5 children alone after my father died. Worked 18-hour days at her loom to keep us fed and educated." He described how Lucia had turned her small textile business into a local success, employing other women from their village, how she had insisted that all her children learned both practical skills and academic subjects, how she had sold her most prized possession gold necklace inherited from her grandmother to pay for Raphael's first semester at university. "When I made my first million, I tried to buy her a mansion," Raphael said with a chuckle. "She refused, said it would separate her from her community. Instead, I renovated her home and the homes of her neighbors, built a community center and a small clinic." Elena nodded appreciatively. "She taught you that power has purpose." "Exactly," Raphael agreed. "Which is why I couldn't let yesterday's incident pass. It wasn't about the bread and water. It was about what that gesture represented. The casual dehumanization, the assumption that someone who looks like me doesn't belong in first class. And now you own the whole airline," Eleanor said with a twinkle in her eye. "Rather poetic justice, if you ask me." Raphael laughed, a warm, genuine sound that lightened the air around them. "Life often writes better stories than we could plan." As they finished their meal, Raphael's phone buzzed with another message from Ma. He read it and looked up at Eleanor with a thoughtful expression. "How would you feel about extending your stay in San Francisco?" he asked. "The Passenger Advocacy Division could use your insight as we develop the training program. And I believe your perspective as an older woman would be invaluable. Another demographic that often faces dismissal or invisibility in travel settings." Elena's face lit up. "I'd be delighted. My grandson and his wife would love having me around longer to help with the baby. But are you sure I'm qualified?" "More than qualified," Raphael assured her. Sometimes the most valuable expertise comes from lived experience rather than professional credentials. As they left the restaurant, Raphael thought about the airline's transformation ahead and about how his mother's lessons continued to guide his actions decades later. In her memory, he would ensure that Skyline Airways became a model of inclusion and respect. What he didn't yet know was that this transformation would become a case study in corporate change management, inspiring similar initiatives across the industry. Nor could he have anticipated how Elelonina Whitman would revolutionize the way airlines train their staff to interact with elderly passengers. The seeds of change had been planted. Now they needed time to grow like bamboo, slowly at first, then with unstoppable momentum. 6 months passed with the speed of clouds viewed from an airplane window. Seemingly slow from a distance, yet covering vast territory. Skyline Airways transformed from the inside out under Raphael's guidance, though he remained largely in the background, allowing Richard Townsend to be the public face of change. On a crisp autumn morning, Raphael arrived at Skyline's headquarters for a quarterly review meeting. The building looked the same from the outside, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in downtown San Francisco. But inside, the changes were unmistakable. The lobby now featured artwork from diverse global artists, including a striking bamboo and textile installation created by artisans from Raphael's hometown. Digital screens displayed customer testimonials in multiple languages. Most notably, staff reflected a diversity that had been conspicuously absent before. "Good morning, Mr. Mendoza," greeted the receptionist, a young woman wearing a hijab. "The team is assembled in the Sky boardroom." Raphael nodded. Yeah, we are doing something different. The unveiled plans for a cultural festival to be held at headquarters, open to employees, their families, and the public. Every department will showcase traditions from around the world. We'll have food, music, art, and stories celebrating the diversity that makes Skyline stronger. Raphael's eyes widened slightly at a particular detail in the presentation. Richard had arranged for textile artisans from Batangas to demonstrate traditional Filipino weaving techniques, including the specific patterns that Raphael's mother had specialized in. This was Eleanor's suggestion, Richard explained, noting Raphael's expression. We thought it would be a fitting tribute. Eleanor squeezed Raphael's hand. Your mother's legacy lives on in ways she couldn't have imagined. After the meeting dispersed, Raphael lingered in the boardroom, studying a photograph that now hung prominently on the wall. It showed his mother at her loom, her face serene in concentration as her hands worked the threads. Beside it hung the framed mission statement of the Lucia Mendoza Scholarship Foundation. She would be proud, came a voice from the doorway. Brian Chen stood there holding a stack of reports. Not just of the changes here, but of how you made them happen. Raphael turned curious. What do you mean? You had the power to destroy careers, to publicly shame the airline, Brian said. Instead, you chose to transform it, to give people like Richard a chance to be better, to create opportunity from injustice. Raphael nodded thoughtfully. Destruction is easy. Building is harder and more worthwhile. As they walked together to Raphael's next meeting, Brian hesitated. There's something I've been meaning to ask you. The day of the incident, you were dressed so casually in economy class clothes, but you were flying first class. Was that intentional? Raphael finished with a slight smile. Not exactly. I had been in lengthy negotiations all night, had barely had time to change. But I've learned over the years that how I dress often determines how I'm treated. Sometimes. That information is valuable. Brian nodded slowly. You were testing the airline even before you decided to buy. I test every company I consider acquiring. Raphael acknowledged. Not just with financial audits, but by experiencing their service as different types of customers. The best data comes from authentic interactions. They reached the elevator where Maya was waiting with Raphael's schedule for the remainder of the day. As Brian turned to leave, Raphael called after him. The real test begins now, Brian. Changing during the spotlight of scrutiny is one thing. Maintaining that change when attention fades is another. Brian straightened. We won't disappoint you, sir. As the elevator doors closed, Raphael thought about the journey ahead. 6 months had brought remarkable progress, but true cultural transformation took years. The foundation was in place, but the real work of building was just beginning. Like bamboo, the strongest growth happened underground, invisible to observers. Raphael was prepared for the long game, just as his mother had taught him. The morning of Skyline's cultural festival dawned bright and clear. Raphael stood at his hotel window, watching the early light illuminate the city. His phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. Special guest arrived safely, keeping her comfortable in the VIP lounge until your signal. Raphael smiled, anticipation building for the surprise he had arranged. After months of searching, Maya had located Cynthia Williams, the flight attendant, whose discriminatory actions had catalyzed these changes. Today, she would witness the transformation her actions had inadvertently sparked. The festival grounds surrounding Skyline headquarters had been transformed overnight. Colorful pavilions represented different regions of the world with employees staffing booths showcasing their cultural heritage. Delicious aromas filled the air as food stations prepared traditional cuisines. A central stage was set for performances throughout the day. Raphael arrived early, walking the grounds before the public was admitted. He paused at the Filipino pavilion where women from Batangas had set up traditional looms. Their weathered hands moved with practiced precision, creating intricate patterns in vibrant colors. Mr. Mendoza called Lena, the eldest weaver, who had known his mother. We've brought something to show you. From a carved wooden box, she withdrew a length of fabric with a distinctive pattern interlocking diamonds in deep blue and gold. Raphael's breath caught. My mother's design, he whispered, touching the fabric reverently. Lena nodded her signature pattern. She taught many of us this technique. We've kept it alive in her memory. Raphael swallowed the unexpected emotion rising in his throat. She would be honored. As the festival officially opened, Raphael moved through the crowds, observing the interactions between employees and visitors. The atmosphere was one of genuine celebration and connection. Skyline staff proudly shared their heritage with colleagues and guests, creating bridges of understanding through stories, food, and traditions. Near the main entrance, Raphael spotted Brian leading a tour for special visitors executives from other airlines who had come to learn about Skyline diversity initiatives. The program had garnered industry attention, with multiple companies requesting consulting services to implement similar changes. Raphael Eleanor waved from the senior lounge pavilion, where older guests could rest in comfortable chairs while experiencing virtual reality tours of global destinations. She had become the unexpected star of Skyline's transformation. Her practical wisdom and no-nonsense approach cutting through corporate jargon to address real issues. "Is our guest comfortable?" Raphael asked. Quietly. Eleanor nodded. Nervous but ready. "She's changed." Raphael. "You'll see it when you meet her." Richard Townsend approached looking relaxed in a bong tagalog, the traditional Filipino formal shirt that Raphael had gifted to each board member. "The media response is overwhelming," Richard reported. "3 major networks are covering the festival, and we've been trending on social media since dawn." He hesitated before adding, "There's something you should see at the memory wall." The memory wall had been Eleanina's idea place where employees and passengers could share stories of discrimination they had faced while traveling alongside their hopes for change. What had started as a therapeutic exercise during training had evolved into a powerful installation of thousands of handwritten cards. As Raphael approached the wall, he noticed a small crowd gathered around a particular section. At the center was a card written in a careful hand. "I was the flight attendant who served a Filipino man bread and water in first class while serving others full meals. I did it because I thought he didn't belong there. I lost my job that day, but gained something more valuable. The beginning of awareness. Today, I work with immigrant communities, teaching English and helping new arrivals navigate American systems. I still have much to learn, but I'm trying to turn my mistake into something better." Cynthia W. Raphael read the card twice, noting the authentic remorse in the words. He turned to Richard. "Is she here now?" Richard nodded. "In the VIP lounge with Maya. She asked to speak with you privately before joining the festival." Raphael found Cynthia sitting alone by a window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 6 months had visibly changed her, the polished perfectionism replaced by a more genuine presence. She stood when he entered, uncertainty in her eyes. "Mr. Mendoza," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Raphael gestured for her to sit and took the chair opposite her. "Your card on the memory wall was unexpected." Cynthia nodded. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but Eleanor encouraged me. She's been remarkably kind." "Eleanor sees potential where others might only see past actions," Raphael observed. "Tell me about your work with immigrant communities." As Cynthia described her volunteer position teaching English to new arrivals, her face transformed, the defensive mask falling away to reveal genuine passion. After losing her flight attendant position, she had moved to a smaller city where her severance package allowed her to work part-time while volunteering. "I teach practical English, how to speak with doctors, how to navigate public transportation, how to handle difficult interactions," she explained. "Things I used to take for granted." "And what have you learned from them?" Raphael asked. Cynthia's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Everything. Resilience. Gratitude. How to find joy in small victories." She wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, this isn't what I planned to say." "Sometimes unplanned words are the most truthful," Raphael said gently. Cynthia took a deep breath. "I came to apologize in person. Not for my job, I deserve to lose that. But for the human dignity, I denied you. There's no excuse for it." Raphael stuttered her, seeing truth in her expression. "You're right. There isn't. But there can be growth beyond it." He told her about his mother's philosophy, about bamboo that bends but doesn't break, about transformation that comes from difficulty. As they talked, the tension between them gradually eased, replaced by the tentative connection of 2 people finding unexpected common ground. "I have a proposal for you," Raphael said finally. The Lucia Mendoza Foundation is developing a program to help international travelers navigate culturally unfamiliar systems, airports, customs, public transportation. Your experience on both sides of this divide could be valuable to that program. Cynthia looked stunned. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you an opportunity," Raphael clarified. "Whether it becomes more depends entirely on what you do with it." Before she could respond, Elena appeared at the door. "It's time for the main ceremony," she announced. "Raphael, they're waiting for you on stage." At the central stage, Richard Townsend welcomed the crowd and introduced Raphael. As he took the microphone, Raphael surveyed the gathering, employees, and their families, community members, media representatives, and industry colleagues. "6 months ago, I was served bread and water on a first-class flight," he began, capturing immediate attention. "Today we celebrate not just the changes that incident sparked but the human capacity for transformation." He spoke briefly about his mother's influence, about the scholarship program established in her name, and about Skyline's journey toward becoming an industry leader in inclusive practices. "Change doesn't happen through policies alone," he continued. "It happens through people choosing differently moment by moment. The flight attendant who intervenes when a passenger is mistreated. The executive who listens to uncomfortable truths. The employee who speaks up despite fear." He gestured to Brian, to Eleanor, to Richard, representing a different aspect of the transformation. Then, surprising many, he acknowledged Cynthia standing at the edge of the crowd. "And sometimes change happens when we are confronted with our own actions and make the difficult choice to grow beyond them." As applause filled the air, Raphael realized that the story that had begun with humiliation in an airplane cabin had evolved into something far more powerful, a narrative not of revenge, but of redemption, of individuals and systems learning to bend without breaking, growing stronger through adversity. His mother would have approved. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of the first 5 recipients of the Lucia Mendoza Scholarship, young people from underrepresented communities pursuing aviation careers. As they joined Raphael on stage, their faces shining with possibility, he felt his mother's presence as strongly as if she stood beside him. "Be like bamboo," he whispered to himself. "Bend, but never break." 1 year to the day after the bread and water incident, Raphael stood in the executive lounge of Hong Kong International Airport. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched Skyline's newest aircraft bearing a distinctive livery featuring bamboo motifs prepare for its inaugural flight to Manila. The route had special significance. It connected his business world with his homeland, creating a bridge between his past and present. "All systems ready for the celebration, sir," Maya reported, tablet in hand. "The crew is assembled and the special passengers have cleared security." Raphael nodded, straightening his Baring Tagalog. For this occasion, he had foregone his usual business suit in favor of the traditional Filipino garment embroidered with subtle patterns, reminiscent of his mother's textile designs. "And our guest of honor?" he asked. "Miss Whitman is resting in the VIP suite. Her grandson is with her," Maya replied. She insisted on walking onto the aircraft herself, despite the doctor's recommendations. Raphael smiled. Elena's determination had only grown stronger in the past year, even as her physical health had begun to show signs of fragility. At 73, she had become an unlikely aviation industry icon, her blunt assessments and practical wisdom cutting through decades of entrenched practices. Airlines around the world now consulted her on making travel more accessible for elderly passengers. "Let her do as she wishes," Raphael said. "She's earned that right." The past year had seen Skyline Airways transformed from a cautionary tale into a case study in corporate culture change. The quarterly financial reports told one part of the story. Passenger numbers up 23%, employee retention improved by 34%, and profits exceeding projections despite significant investment in training and community programs. But the true measure of success lay in the less quantifiable changes, the shift in how employees spoke about their work, the stories from passengers who felt truly welcomed for the first time, the industry awards recognizing innovation in inclusive practices. Raphael made his way through the terminal toward the gate where the celebration would begin. As he walked, he noticed how Skyline employees now interacted with passengers, making eye contact, listening attentively, responding with genuine care. The mechanical courtesy of the past had been replaced by authentic human connection. At the gate, Brian Chen was overseeing final preparations. In the past year, he had grown from a hesitant former flight attendant into a confident executive, recently promoted to Vice President of Customer Experience. "Everything is ready, sir," Brian reported, "though we had a last-minute addition to the passenger manifest that you might find interesting." Before Raphael could inquire further, Richard Townsend approached, accompanied by a dignified Filipino woman in her 60s. Raphael blinked in surprise. "Dr. Reyes," he said, extending his hand. "This is unexpected." Dr. Isabel Reyes, president of Manila's leading university and one of the Philippines' most respected educators, smiled warmly. "When Richard mentioned this inaugural flight, I couldn't resist the opportunity. Our university is eager to discuss expanding the scholarship program. We've had inquiries from 3 other major airlines about implementing similar initiatives," Richard added. The Lucia Mendoza Scholarship has become something of a gold standard. The scholarship program had flourished beyond Raphael's expectations. What had begun as educational support for 5 students had expanded to include mentorship, internships, and guaranteed job interviews. The first cohort was still in training, but their progress reports were exemplary. Strong despite her slower movements, Raphael crossed to her immediately, taking her hand. "We wouldn't dream of it." Elena had become something of a surrogate mother to Raphael over the past year, their bond forged through countless hours of collaboration and shared purpose. When her health had begun to decline 3 months earlier, Raphael had insisted on arranging the best medical care, bringing specialists to San Francisco for consultations. "How are you feeling today?" he asked quietly. "Well, enough for one more adventure," she replied with a wink. "But besides, I need to inspect this new aircraft design. I made those accessibility recommendations, and I intend to see them implemented properly." The boarding process began with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Raphael, Eleanor, Richard, and Brian stood together, 4 unlikely allies whose collaboration had catalyzed industry-wide change. As cameras flashed, Raphael felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with humiliation had transformed into something meaningful and lasting. Once aboard, Raphael found himself drawn to "Circle," she said softly, reading his thoughts. "Indeed," Raphael agreed. "Though when I sat here a year ago, I couldn't have imagined all that would follow." The remaining passengers boarded, including the 5 scholarship recipients who would be doing part of their training in Manila. Raphael watched them enter the aircraft with the wide-eyed excitement of young people at the beginning of their careers. Their diverse faces reflected the breadth of the program. A young Filipino woman from a fishing village similar to where Raphael had grown up, an African-American man from inner-city Chicago, a Syrian refugee who had arrived in America just 3 years earlier, a Native American woman from the Navajo Nation, and a young man with Down syndrome who had dreamed of working in aviation since childhood. As the boarding completed, Raphael noticed one last passenger making her way down the aisle. Cynthia. Their eyes met, and she offered a tentative smile. In the past year, she had become an invaluable contributor to the Traveler Orientation Program. Her first-hand knowledge of both airline operations and the challenges of cultural navigation, making her uniquely qualified. Though their relationship remained professional rather than friendly, there was mutual respect where once there had been contempt. The captain's voice came over the intercom not with the standard announcement, but with a personal message. Today's flight is more than a new route on a map. It represents a new way of thinking about who belongs in the skies, who deserves respect in travel, and how we build an industry that honors every journey. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Raphael gazed out the window at Hong Kong falling away beneath them. He thought about his mother, about bamboo, about the long invisible growth that precedes visible strength. She would be proud, Elena said softly, again, reading his thoughts. Not just of what you built, but of how you built it. Raphael nodded, emotion catching unexpectedly in his throat. Through difficulty, not around it. As the plane climbed into the cloud-scattered sky, Raphael felt a profound sense of peace. The circle was complete, but the journey like bamboo's growth would continue long after this moment. In transforming an airline, he had honored his mother's memory more genuinely than any monument could have done. The airline meals were served not with the practiced efficiency of the past, but with genuine warmth. Each passenger, regardless of appearance or accent, received the same respectful attention. As Raphael accepted his perfectly prepared Filipino fusion dish, he smiled at the quiet revolution represented by this simple act of equal service. The bamboo had not broken. It had grown stronger, reaching higher than anyone could have imagined. 5 years passed. The view from Raphael's office in Skyline's headquarters had changed. New buildings had risen in the San Francisco skyline, and the company had expanded to occupy 3 additional floors in their tower. What remained constant was the bamboo plant in a handcrafted Filipino pot beside his desk, its slender stalks reaching upward with quiet determination. At 63, Raphael had begun the careful process of stepping back from daily operations, though he remained actively involved as chairman of the board. His silver hair had grown more pronounced, and fine lines had deepened around his eyes, marking both the passing years and a life rich with laughter. "The last quarter's numbers are in," Mia announced, entering with her customary efficiency. Though Raphael had encouraged her to advance her own career, she had chosen to remain as his right hand now with the title of Chief of Staff and her own team of assistants. And Raphael prompted, setting aside the report he'd been reviewing, record profits for the 8th consecutive quarter. Mia replied with satisfaction. The investment in the new sustainable fuel initiative is paying off faster than projected, and customer loyalty metrics continue to lead the industry. Raphael nodded, pleased but not surprised. The transformation that had begun with a personal slight had evolved into a comprehensive business philosophy that permeated every aspect of the airline. Respect drives retention had become a mantra cited in business schools and corporate boardrooms around the world. "Any word from Manila?" he asked. "The ceremony is scheduled for next month. President Reyes has confirmed her attendance and all 5 of the original scholarship recipients will be there." Raphael smiled at the thought of those 5 young people, now professionals in their own right. Ana Cruz, the Filipino woman who reminded him so much of his younger self, had recently been promoted to flight operations manager. Marcus Johnson had become an award-winning flight attendant before transitioning to training and development. Layla Beam was pioneering new accessibility protocols for passengers with limited English proficiency. Thomas Beer had just patented an innovative design for more comfortable economy seating. And David Chen had become the airline's most beloved customer service representative, his natural warmth and unique perspective winning over even the most difficult passengers. "And the Alellanina Whitman Center?" Raphael asked, his voice softening. "Construction is complete. The dedication will be part of the ceremony." Raphael nodded, a familiar ache of loss mingling with satisfaction. Eleanor had passed away 2 years earlier, peaceful in her sleep after attending her great-grandson's 5th birthday party. Her final years had been among her most impactful. Her advocacy for elderly travelers had revolutionized how airlines approached this growing demographic. The training center named in her honor would ensure her practical wisdom continued to influence new generations of aviation professionals. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Richard Townsend entered looking remarkably youthful despite having recently celebrated his 70th birthday. The transformation of Skyline had transformed Richard as well. The defensive corporate executive had evolved into a thoughtful leader who spoke openly about his own journey from complicity to commitment. "The board meeting is about to start," Richard reminded him. "But there's someone here to see you first." Behind Richard stood an elegant Filipino woman in her early 30s, Dr. Ana Cruz, the first Lucia Mendoza scholar and now a respected figure in the aviation industry. "Ana," Raphael greeted her warmly. "I thought you were in Manila preparing for the ceremony." "I flew in early," she explained, her confidence a far cry from the shy village girl who had once. Airways flight attendant appeared at the rooftop door. "Mr. Mendoza, your car is ready whenever you are, sir." "Thank you, Jessica," Raphael replied, recognizing the young woman who had been hired through the community outreach program. "I'll be down shortly." As the attendant left, Raphael took one last look at the evening sky at the stars emerging one by one above the city lights. Somewhere among them, he imagined, his mother and Alellanina were watching with approval. "Some circles take time to fully close," he whispered, remembering what he had told Brian years ago. This circle from humiliation to transformation, from exclusion to belonging, had closed beautifully, creating not an ending, but an expanding ripple of possibility. Raphael turned toward the door, ready to continue the journey. The bamboo had not just survived, it had flourished, reaching higher than anyone could have imagined from such humble roots. And that, he knew, was his mother's greatest legacy. If this story moved you, even a little, let your voice join ours. Support stories that speak truth, courage, and identity. White right pointing backhand index. Subscribe to Global Truth Project, where powerful narratives like Katrina's are brought to life, and where your story also matters. Bell hit subscribe. Join the movement. Find your voice. Global Truth Project, where every truth deserves to be heard. Nervously accepted her scholarship. There's something I wanted to discuss with you in person. As Richard excused himself, Anna placed a weathered wooden box on Raphael's desk. My grandmother was a weaver in Batangas, she began. When she heard about the expansion of the Raphael Mendoza program, she sent me this. Anna opened the box carefully to reveal a length of fabric with a distinctive pattern interlocking diamonds in blue and gold. Raphael's breath caught. My mother's design, he whispered. Anna nodded. According to my grandmother, she learned this pattern from Raphael Mendoza herself. They worked side by side during the regional textile cooperative in the 1970s. Raphael touched the fabric reverently, feeling the connection to his mother as tangibly as if she stood beside him. What are the chances? He murmured. In Filipino, we call it tadhana destiny, Anna replied. My grandmother believes nothing is coincidence. That my path crossing yours was part of a circle meant to complete itself. Raphael smiled at the poetry of it, how a pattern woven by his mother's hands decades ago had somehow found its way back to him through the very program created in her honor. We are planning something special for the ceremony next month, Anna continued. The new uniform designs for cabin crew will incorporate elements of this pattern, subtle details in the scarves and ties. Your mother's artistry will quite literally take flight with every Skyline journey. As they walked together toward the boardroom, Raphael felt a profound sense of completion. The company he had acquired in a moment of justified anger had become a vehicle for something far more significant than revenge or even success. It had become a living legacy, not just to his mother, but to the principle she had instilled in him from childhood. Be like bamboo, he murmured to himself. Bend, but never break. The boardroom had changed dramatically over the years. What had once been a homogeneous group of executives was now one of the most diverse boards in the industry. Today, they were considering the final approval for Skyline's most ambitious initiative, yet a comprehensive apprenticeship program that would create pathways to aviation careers for underrepresented communities across their global network. Sir Raphael took his place at the head of the table. He noticed Cynthia sitting quietly at the far end. Now the director of the Traveller Advocacy Program, she had earned her position through demonstrable results and unwavering commitment. The program she led had expanded to 23 airports worldwide, helping thousands of vulnerable travelers navigate the complexities of international travel. Their eyes met briefly across the table, a moment of shared understanding between two people whose journey together had begun with bread and water and evolved into something neither could have imagined. Not friendship exactly, but a profound mutual respect forged through accountability and growth. Brian Chen, now Chief Operating Officer, called the meeting to order. As the discussion began, Raphael observed the thoughtful exchanges, the respectful disagreements, the collaborative problem-solving. This, Evan, more than the profit margins or industry awards, was the true measure of what they had built together. That evening, Raphael stood alone on the rooftop garden of the Skyline building, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In one hand, he held his mother's textile. In the other, a photograph of Eleanor at the first cultural festival, her face alight with purpose. We did it, he whispered to both women, though they were present only in his heart. We changed not just an airline, but how people think about belonging. Below him, San Francisco hummed with evening activity. Above, a Skyline aircraft traced a graceful arc across the sky, carrying passengers who would be served with equal dignity, regardless of their appearance or accent or the clothes they wore. Raphael thought about the bread and water that had started this journey. How an act meant to diminish had instead become the catalyst for growth. How lessons learned in a small Filipino village had transformed a global company. How individual choices to discriminate or to respect, to punish or to transform, to remain rigid or to grow like bamboo shaped not just personal journeys but entire systems. In the soft evening light, Raphael made a silent promise to both women who would shape his path. To continue bending without breaking, to use power as a tool for transformation rather than retribution, to remember that true strength comes not from domination, but from the ability to grow through difficulty. As darkness fell, lights began to illuminate the city below. Raphael carefully folded his mother's textile and placed it in his pocket close to his heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose growth over bitterness, transformation over revenge. Tonight, he would honor the journey from a cup of water and a piece of bread to an airline that carried not just passengers, but his mother's legacy of resilience and dignity across the skies. A Skyline Airways flight attendant appeared at the rooftop door. "Mr. Mendoza, your car is ready whenever you are, sir." "Thank you, Jessica," Raphael replied, recognizing the young woman who had been hired through the community outreach program. "I'll be down shortly." As the attendant left, Raphael took one last look at the evening sky at the stars emerging one by one above the city lights. Somewhere among them, he imagined, his mother and Eleonina were watching with approval. "Some circles take time to fully close," he whispered, remembering what he had told Brian years ago. This circle, from humiliation to transformation, from exclusion to belonging, had closed beautifully, creating not an ending, but an expanding ripple of possibility. Raphael turned toward the door, ready to continue the journey. The bamboo had not just survived, it had flourished, reaching higher than anyone could have imagined from such humble roots. And that, he knew, was his mother's greatest legacy. If this story moved you, even a little, let your voice join ours. Support stories that speak truth, courage, and identity. White right pointing backhand index. Subscribe to Global Truth Project, where powerful narratives like Katrina's are brought to life, and where your story also matters. Bell hit subscribe. Join the movement. Find your voice. Global Truth Project, where every truth deserves to be heard.